Hi, everyone. I'm Mac, the Gray Skeptic, and I'm here with the most renowned evangelical preacher that I've ever met or seen on YouTube. This is Godless Engineer. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah. So I'm the Godless Engineer. I have a channel here on YouTube where I talk about, atheism, anti-theism, mythicism, and reading hate comments and the flat Earth. So I've got a wide palette.
He does. If for any odd reason you're not sub to the Godless Engineer and you're sub to me, go fix that real quick. Um, this guy's a hoot. The best word for him. He's hilarious. His hate comments alone deserve a reason to subscribe. So, but we're here today for another atheist flashback. But we're going to kind of breeze through that part because John has a lot of Jesus mythicism that he shares on other channels, and I'd like to get into it more on here because I'm very curious about it, and he is very knowledgeable about it. So we're kind of going to go through the evolution of John, from Catholic to atheist to Jesus mythicist.
Okay.
Cool. And I see the live chat now. I just jumped in. We have Caitlin Chloe. Thanks for joining in. We have another freaking atheist, Don. We have Nigel Witness. And all the Godless Engineers here too. Check that out. And Beige. Awesome. Thanks for joining in, guys. All right. So first off, the first question I love to ask all you Christians and Catholics is do you like to drink?
Oh, I definitely do. I mean, I actually drank all of my beer before getting on, but I do. I I mean, I drank all of that. I do have whiskey that I'm working on. I'm apparently not going to have tonight.
Oh, why not?
I was informed that I'm not going to have it tonight.
That's fair.
Okay.
That's fair.
Uh, so yeah, I mean, but I mean, even when I was young, my parents, they drank and they were pretty religious. So yeah, I've never had a problem with beer really.
Okay. I know a lot of Catholics in my neck of the woods, like all of them drink. Like that's like they are renowned for it in the county next for me.
Yeah, my
But
my uncle actually has the phone number of a rehab center tattooed on his arm. Uh, so that's legit. Yeah.
wow.
Uncle Mike.
Oh, I met him.
Yeah.
Oh,
She's like, oh, makes
Yeah.
sense.
Uh, wow. All right. Well, um, as a Catholic, um, I want to ask you a few like details about your religion. Um,
Oh, okay. Don't expect any like hyper specific like knowledge
okay.
because I was not a good Catholic.
Fair enough. That's all right. Um, so first, just how literal do you guys take the Bible?
Well, I know when I was growing up, I mean, I didn't take the entire Bible literally. Like even like I don't know, I guess as a kid, I was told like, oh, Noah's Ark was a thing, and I would just accept that because I had people that I trusted telling me it. So I was just like, oh, okay, yeah, it was a thing. And it's pretty much the same thing with every part of the Bible. Like they told me that Jesus died and rose again. I was like, oh, cool. But I mean, honestly, to my core person, like it didn't really matter all that much. So like the literal version of the Bible, like didn't really factor in. I guess maybe I had some like what is it, compartmentalization when it comes to that, but I really didn't think about my faith a lot, like because down here, at least where I was brought up, like it's just the default kind of setting to believe in God, to believe the Bible, and to be Christian and all this other stuff. Um, you know, it that's just kind of the default setting. And so I didn't have any reason to really doubt it. But I do know that as I grew up, like I was able to reason my way out of like, believing that Noah's Ark was a real thing. And everything like that. I think probably one of the last things to go was the whole idea of Adam and Eve, because I do remember like as like a 12 or 13-year-old kid, I was sitting there trying to rationalize out like, all right, if Adam and Eve were a thing, then that means everybody on earth is related to one another. And so like I was, even as a kid, I was trying to rationalize it out. And to be quite honest with how evolution works, it's not really all that far off, because I mean, we're not all like directly genetically related, as far as like, I know I live in Alabama and we're the cousin fucking state, but it's not like that. But I mean, we are all related in that we all, evolved from single-celled organisms. So it's not really all that far off, but it was a wrong thing to think. And I think as I grew up, I started to take it less and less seriously. And, even though it wasn't all that, part of my core person, like still those beliefs kind of melted away, and I didn't really have any problem like shaking the beliefs. I think the biggest thing for me was the guilt. Like, I don't know if you've interacted with Catholics that really talk about all the guilt and whatnot, but, I had a lot of guilt put on me, about, not following Jesus or not being as good as Jesus or as perfect as Jesus and all this other stuff. So I would say that the guilt was more of a main component to like my core person, that more so than the literal beliefs.
And I can relate to that. When I was a Christian, I really accepted it a lot like you did, but I feel like I was more invested in it. Like I was not as skeptical of a child. Even with the Adam and Eve stuff, just thinking everyone was related to Adam and Eve. It's just like, it's just like you said, it was kind of default. So I didn't really question that default until much later in life. But another thing I wanted to ask you is how deep is your lineage of Catholicism? Like, were your parents, grandparents? How far does it go?
Well, I mean, I really only knew like my mom and dad's parents. So, well, I mean, I guess I did know my great grandparents on my mom's side too. And I think that they were more Protestant than like Catholic, but I know my mom's mom, my grandmother is Catholic. And then my mom was Catholic until she divorced my dad and she left the Catholic Church. And then my dad, they are the generational Catholics. My grandmother on my dad's side, she was Puerto Rican and she was devout Catholic. And then my grandfather, I assume he was Catholic all of his life. And so that's the side that has like the deep roots in Catholicism. So I don't know about my mom's side, but I do know my grandmother is still Catholic and my mom is now like I think a Lutheran.
Gotcha. I hear an echo, or I hear my voice on your side, I think. I'm not sure.
Oh,
I did. Yeah, I do. I still do. But
let me try to fix that. Sorry, my mic is like ultra sensitive, so
that's okay. It's just I'm distracting myself.
I don't know. Is it better?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, I don't hear myself. Cool. Well, then moving on. So were you a young Earth creationist then?
I don't really consider myself, well, like I don't think I was. But then again, I mean, I'm not all that sure, I guess. Because like I said, like the literal beliefs weren't really that much of my core person. So I don't really, I can't really recall if I literally believed it. I would probably say at one point in time I might have, and whenever I thought about my faith, I certainly did. But I know once I started learning about like the history of the universe and whatnot, like it, I mean, it easily defeated the religious explanation of things, and so it just no longer became like an issue for me. Like it, I did the whole compartmentalization of my faith so that it I could still have my faith and there it be like an old universe or whatnot. Um, so I guess that would be the best answer I could give for that.
Okay. Now I've heard that, um, like the Pope, um, he accepts evolution. So, does your family accept evolution? Did you when you were younger, if you remember much?
Yeah, I mean, I'm fairly certain that my family always believed in evolution. Although I think that probably my mom's side is probably more of a young Earth creationist. So I think that um, my dad's side probably accepted evolution because I mean, Catholics are more accepting of that kind of thing. And so I would say there was probably a mixed bag, but then again, like when I was a kid, that stuff never really got brought up. Like we would go to church, I mean, I wouldn't listen in church, but parents thought you were listening and whatnot. So I mean, it just really like thinking about those things really weren't important until like I started learning it in school, and then it's like the scientific evidence and reasoning behind it trumps what the Bible says. And so in that case, in that instance, like it was more of a literal light switch for me. Like, oh yeah, that makes sense. This shit doesn't make sense. So, I don't know. I feel like I'm not really expressing a good Catholic kind of demeanor here.
No, no, it's all right. I mean, everyone is like their own level of class or Catholic or religious. So, and that's kind of what I want to bring out is just like how much of an impact it actually had on you. You don't have to be the perfect Catholic.
Yeah.
It's all right.
Well, no, no, no. I know. It's just that like recounting this and everything like that. It really does like show me like how little I knew about my faith and how little my faith actually impacted like me as a kid. Like just the fact that I didn't really care about it. Like people told me that God existed and all these other things, and I was just like, oh, okay, well, fine, that's how things are. And then I would just go play video games or something like that, and it really wouldn't affect me all that much. It didn't really, um, you know it had no real world effect on what I thought. And it's like I forgot it as soon as people told it to me until, it would come up in conversation. Like somebody would be talking about God or something like that. And, obviously I would just be like, oh, yeah, God exists. And there was nobody around that was saying like God didn't exist. So I had no reason to like question it.
Right. Well, then moving along with it, what or like how old were you when you really started to change your mind on it? Like when you started to learn more about um, the universe and evolution and timelines that don't line up with the Bible?
Well, I mean, I guess just as it naturally came up, like in school and stuff, I never really thought about how things affected my belief in God because God just like it was like God was important to me, and I would pray to God, and I would feel bad because I didn't go to church more or I didn't do more things in like in the church community or whatever. But like as far as like my how it affected like my day-to-day life and how it affected my life in school or my education or whatnot. I mean, like when it got brought up in like biology class, let's say, it never really dawned on me that it was totally against my faith because I mean, I felt like when I was in school, I had shut off like that whole portion of myself. Like I didn't really consider God when I was in school. And I mean, I would say unless God was brought up in the conversation, or like my parents were talking about it, or my friends were, going to Wednesday night youth services, I really didn't think about God all that much, or my beliefs in the Bible, or about the Bible, or anything like that. I would say that the first time that it really started to affect me or whatnot was when I started struggling with like the God concept in general. And that didn't happen until I was in my mid 20s, I would say.
Okay. Um, well then, I want to skip a couple things that were like on my list because I don't think it's like really relevant to the conversation at this point.
Sorry.
No. It's okay. It's good. It's good. So you believed in the Bible. You believed that God existed. I froze there for a second. I'm not sure if it froze on you. Um, but what I guess what changed your mind later on, not just um, when you started to just doubt God, where did you have that switch where you became like a Jesus mythicist?
Oh, okay. Um, well, so Jesus mythicism actually came very much later into my atheism. As far as like what got me out of the faith and whatnot, and led me in that direction, I had a friend after a softball game one night say, well, if you don't literally believe the Bible, then you're not a real Christian. And I know that now as a No True Scotsman, and but at the time I didn't know about that. And so I was like, well, I got to figure out, what I believe, because I didn't believe in the Bible completely. Like I knew the Noah's Ark story was bullshit by that point, and I knew that evolution was a real thing, and all these other scientific facts that disprove the Bible. And so it like, as far as me not being a Christian anymore, which by that time I was more non-denominational Christian, um, it was more of a light switch at that point. But getting on into my atheism and really embracing it, and paying attention more to that particular discussion that was being had on the internet and around in my family and whatnot. It got to the point where I was online. I found myself in Facebook groups and whatnot, arguing about Jesus and the Bible and the reliability of the Bible. And I remember I was in some kind of discussion, and I was like, sure, like I need to be sure about the evidence that we have for Jesus Christ. Saying that, well, of course, Jesus existed in history. Here's the evidence for it. But you see, the problem was that I went looking for it and I didn't find it. Like there's physical evidence for Pilate. We have a carved stone for Pilate that has the inscription of Pilate's name and everything like that, that really cements Pilate in history. But the problem is that I just couldn't find any reliable information about Jesus when he existed. And so that kind of like that particular search led me to David Fitzgerald's book, to the Nailed, 10 Christian Myths. And it talks about these myths about Jesus that aren't actually true. And a lot of that's covered in it are common things that a lot of people think are true or are fact, and they just simply are not. And so that got me looking into it, and I was really convinced by his book. And then I also read like Randall Helm's Gospel Fictions. And what Gospel Fictions does is it compares the Old Testament to the New Testament, and it shows you how the New Testament parallels the Old Testament. It shows how in the New Testament, like Jesus's spontaneous creation of food matches miracles by Elisha. It matches miracles by Moses in the desert. It matches a whole lot of things in the Old Testament. And the thinking there is that, well, if Jesus is the ultimate prophet, then he has to not only do what the older prophets did, but also do it better and more spectacular. And so that was kind of the thinking there. That's just one particular aspect of it. Like in Randall Helm's book, he also points out how the exodus out of Egypt for Moses is paralleled and mirrored in the New Testament, in I believe it's Matthew, where they they escape to Egypt, after what is his name? Herod. After Herod, orders the massacre of the babies, the slaughter of the innocents. It was meant to parallel what happened with Moses in that particular portion. And it talked about the inconsistencies with that. And so, all of that. And then you get to like Richard Carrier and his debates, but also his books, Proving History and On the Historicity of Jesus. And so that was kind of how I got led in that direction. Is I started off with these common ideas that are easily refuted, and then getting more specifically into the structure and the content of the Bible and how it seems to be structured to complement the Old Testament, and then into the more specific and very targeted works of Richard Carrier. Which I highly suggest getting his books if you really want to deep dive into how you can prove historical things, or things that happened in history, and just the general historicity argument against Jesus. So that's kind of what my progress looked like. A lot of people like to just dwindle it down to, oh, you don't want him to exist or whatnot. Honestly, it doesn't matter to me whether or not he existed or whatever. That still doesn't mean that he's a divine person or the Son of God or anything like that. Doesn't mean that anything in the Bible is actually true or anything like that. But what I do care about is an accurate portrayal of like history, and having like good evidence to say, yes, he did exist. The problem is, though, is that we don't have that evidence. We don't have evidence like we have for, say, Pilate or Herod or any other historical figure that you can think of. And that is what ultimately convinced me, is the utter lack of evidence that actually cements him in history.
Right. And I kind of relate that to the flood myths that we have as well, because we have Noah's Ark, which when I found out that that's more or less based loosely off the Epic of Gilgamesh and then stories before that, Christianity just has a problem with plagiarism, it seems. And I'm not sure if I don't believe that there was no Jesus type character, but I mean, especially at this point, I definitely follow that he wasn't who he said he was, or he didn't live any kind of life really that it talks about in the Bible, because it's so inconsistent in between the books. And from what I've heard you talk about and a few others like on the Non Sequitur show, there's way more books that could have been in the Old Testament. And they just don't follow each other. They were written way after the fact of his life or whatever.
Right.
So at this point, do you believe that there was any kind of Jesus character that it was based off of, or do you think it's way more probable that it wasn't based on anyone except just Old Testament prophesiers?
Well, I think that the most probable answer is that there was no physical Jesus. But to be more specific, the reason why I say that is because that's what Paul pushes. Paul was the first one to write about Jesus, and Paul writes about a Jesus that only exists after he resurrects from the dead. So these are visions of Jesus that supposedly occurred after he died, and Paul stresses that he gets his information from the scriptures and visions. So you have the very first real record of this Jesus character, being purported by this guy who says he never saw Jesus walk the earth or anything like that. He only saw ghostly visions of Jesus, and that he got his information from the scriptures. And then you also have like the New Testament Gospels, where they initially start out blatantly telling you, I'm getting this from the Old Testament by citing like an Isaiah quote about it. And you have these other different things, like in 2 Peter, they are actually responding to people that are saying that, oh, Christians just believe these myths about their Savior. And so what they do is they forge an entire letter that recounts an actual physical, encounter with Jesus. But they literally say in it that, people are saying that we just follow these myths. Nuh-uh, here's an account, and it's just, it's a forgery. And there's several ways in which you can tell that it's a forgery. There's just a lot of evidence that piles up that makes you consider the fact that he probably didn't exist. If you look at Mark being the earliest gospel, he doesn't actually have like Jesus as a physical person on earth until the human is baptized in the water by John the Baptist, in which then Jesus, or the Messiah figure, actually inhabits the body and then wears a nice little Jesus costume around on earth. The reason why it's structured like that is because the early Jewish Christians, they believed in a pre-existent Jesus. Even if you go to the book of John, it talks about how the Word was with God. Like in the beginning, there was God, and the Word was with God. And of course, Jesus is the Word of God, right? Mm-hmm. So John establishes, of course, John was written in the 90s to the 2nd century. So John establishes that it was a common belief that there was this pre-existent Jesus, but there's also Philo of Alexandria that was writing way before Paul was, and he talked about a Messiah figure that already existed in the Jewish theology. And then if you go to the Septuagint of Zechariah, then you have it literally saying Jesus in it, talking about how he's the Messiah. And it talks about like where he's supposed to come from. They interpret this thing about the branch being Nazareth. And so you have all these lines of evidence that seem to point to a fabricated Christ figure. When one of the big things about history is that you have to have independent sources. So whenever a Christian is like, well, we have 4 independent sources in the Gospels, you have to correct them and be like, no, those aren't independent sources. For one thing, Mark is the only gospel that is truly independent. John was written in the 90s, so he wasn't really independent, but he was a completely separate Christian group out there that was just popular. And then you've got Paul. So it's really Mark and Paul that are your best sources in the Bible. That's why I really cringe hard whenever Christians say that, well, the Bible is dozens of books that attest to, the historicity of Jesus. No, you've really got Paul stuff, which that's just one author. And then you've got Mark, the author of Mark, who is not a first-hand witness, who wrote 40 years after Jesus died. That's almost a whole lifetime after Jesus died. So the evidence for Jesus's existence is very flimsy and doesn't really hold a lot of water. It doesn't have a lot of weight behind it. Whereas the probability that he was created from Scripture, which we already know that there were Jews that were going around about that time that were espousing this Messiah figure. We know that there were several Jewish groups at the time with different theologies, and we have examples of one of these groups espousing a Messiah figure in Philo of Alexandria. So to say that, there was an actual Jesus is to disregard all of that prior evidence that suggests that they were expecting a Messiah to come, and the fact that this Messiah figure, if you think about it, each gospel fulfills some subset of prophecies about this Messiah figure. So collectively, they all answer every single prophecy in the Old Testament. And that should really make you question things, because what that really makes it look like is you have several groups in the first century that had different ideas about what the Messiah was, what he did, what he said, where he went, and everything like that. You have these different ideas, and then they all just got cobbled together. That's what it really looks like to me, rather than a Jesus actually existed. Because you also have to figure that if a Jesus actually existed, then there would have been firsthand witnesses that would be able to correct the story. But instead, what you have are these varying and wildly different ideas of what this Messiah figure is. That's even before you factor in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which have an even wider net of different Messiah figures. For instance, there's this one idea that I like to bring up where Jesus has Mary Magdalene up on a hill, and he pulls out a woman from his side, and he fucks that woman, and then he pulls it like he comes in his hand, and he looks at Mary and says, do this in remembrance of me, and then he eats his own cum. I mean, there are these different things in history about Jesus that are clearly made up, that Christians don't believe, but these particular set of books are what actually happened, despite the fact that none of it matches any kind of history.
There's a lot to unpack there.
Sorry, I get focused on something and I run with it and I keep going. So it's okay to interrupt me and to get me to stop to say something.
Okay, no, it's fun to listen to, and like I said, you're so knowledgeable on this, and it's way funner to just let you go and throw it all out there. Now, the Dead Sea Scroll thing, that's the second time I've heard that from you. And I remember now the first stream that I was on with you, I think it was with Steve McRae. You brought that up, and we all had a pretty good laugh about Jesus eating his own cum. But yeah. One question I had for you, and this might be a dumb one, or it might be a good one. I'm really not sure. But how do you figure out what timeline all of these books and editorials were written in? How do you know that Paul wrote it first? Do they just date everything that they write, or do you know?
Well, yeah. So, we do have some original writings from Paul. And the earliest that we can date them is the 50s. And normally you date these historical texts based on what they talk about. And so given what Paul describes and what he talks about, that's where we get the date. Now, 50s is a very general idea. It's in a ballpark of maybe 10 to 15 years around the 50s in which we think that he wrote. So when I say 50s, I'm not saying 50s plus or minus 15 years. But it's because of what is actually written in the document. So for instance, with the Gospel of Mark, we know that the Gospel of Mark was written after 70, between 65 and 70 AD, because in 70 AD the Jewish temple was destroyed, and in Mark Mark is the first time in any Christian text, which you only had Paul beforehand, and he didn't know about this, but it talks about the destruction of the Jewish temple. So in In order to say that Mark was dated earlier than that, you would have to assume that prophecies actually yield positive results. And so, unless you already knew that, like, the temple being destroyed was going to be a thing, which makes it not a prophecy, then I mean, it would be safer to assume that prophecies do not yield positive results. Any prophecy that we've had in the past, when they're specific enough, like the Jewish temple is going to be destroyed or something like that, um, it's not come true. So, given the prior probability that prophecies don't turn out to be true, uh, huh? I know. Given that the prophecies are never true, that would put the writing of Mark to be 70 A.D. or after, and then Matthew and Luke were written after Mark because they verbatim use stuff from Mark. And then the earliest we've been able to date the Gospel of John has been the 90s to the second century, based on what's written in it. And I'm wanting to say that we've been able to like carbon date like our earliest manuscripts of it, but I'm not exactly sure about that one. So, but that is how we build the timeline of the stuff. Very hyper specific reasons for thinking these things.
Right. Now it's funny to me because because in the Bible, and I haven't looked at it in a while. I could just grab my skeptic Bible and look, but I'll ask you. Isn't it like isn't the order in the Bible like Matthew, Mark, then Luke, then like Paul's way later or something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny, and like I don't doubt that they're wrong because I mean they kind of get a lot wrong, um, but yeah, it's just interesting, and I just want to say for kind of everyone listening, like what my thoughts on this is, and if anyone is having kind of like a hard time swallowing this pill of maybe Jesus didn't exist, I like to kind of think of it as um, there are so many different accounts of his life. Um, and just like there's so many different accounts of like Superman's life, it's like you can really, I feel like if you think of it that way, like as gods, like our modern day superheroes, we get so many different renditions of the same character. And it's always because someone's trying to push a different narrative, or they think that this would really add to the character in a positive way or make the story more exciting. And it's really, really easy to think that they would do that with this history. So just food for thought there, more or less. And I don't know what you think of that line of thinking, if that follows.
Oh, it definitely does. There's actually a very good documentary that has been made, but I don't think it's out publicly yet, called Batman and Jesus. And it basically compares the arguments about Jesus and his life to, what is the official timeline of Batman's life, like the Batman saga. Because I mean, they even go as far as to go to a Comic-Con, get a whole bunch of like Batman, fans into a room, and they give them all of these different timelines, and it's so hilarious because you got one guy in there that's like, "Now listen, I think we can all agree the Scooby-Doo Batman got to go."
yeah, because like even if you ask me about Superman, Batman, or the Flash, I can like give you like a pretty solid history on it. But then if you ask another Superman, Batman, or Flash fan about them, you're probably gonna get a pretty different story because we just pick what lines up the best with your hero, and it's fun. It's like I think it's really fun in that way, and I like to look the only thing that I really like about religion is that you can see culture with it. Um, and again, I kind of relate it to like superhero stuff now. It's just you can see you can kind of see what the like the culture's aiming for sometimes, or you can see like you can date what was going on in the world. Like I think there were a few comic books where like Batman and Robin were like in World War II helping, and the same thing with like Captain America and stuff. So like it really helps add character to real life history, and I think that's fun, and I think that's really artistic. But to think that it's real, and then you take their ideals, especially from the Bible, that can be really dangerous, especially in like today's time.
Right. And I mean, like a lot of people like to say, well, like as far as Jesus goes, well, you know, there most probably was an apocryphal teacher in the first century Judea that they pulled all this information from. And I mean, while that's easy to say, there's not any actual evidence in history to suggest that.
Mm.
Because like you've got, there's actually this list of 20 different historical historians that existed in the first century that should have written about Jesus that actually didn't. A lot like I don't know if people just don't research that list, but there's a lot of historicists that will push that list as proving that Jesus existed when they don't, because they don't say anything about him. But Josephus, which a lot of people like to pull out, but he actually does record a lot of these failed messiahs, primarily because they're failed messiahs. So if you know, Jesus did exist in some form, and he was just a failed apocryphal Messiah that tried to bring about, you know, the salvation of Jews. I do believe that Josephus had a reason to write about him. Josephus wrote about this one guy called the Egyptian, who what he did was he gathered up a huge following, and he met at the Mount of Olives, and he went from the Mount of Olives into Jerusalem, and he was going to militarily by force take over Jerusalem because that's what the Jews thought the Messiah was supposed to do. He claimed to be the Messiah. There's even prophecies in the Old Testament that talk about how Jesus will ride in, or not Jesus, but the Messiah will ride in, you know, to the east or something like that of Jerusalem, which is the Mount of Olives. The direction for the Mount of Olives. And so that's why he went to the Mount of Olives and then, you know, charged in through that side. And this is recorded in Josephus. So I don't have a problem using Josephus, but there is that one, there's the two problematic passages in Josephus, and we can talk about that later if you want to, but I'm just saying that in order to say that it was most probable that there was just a guy that was a apocryphal preacher, you have to have some kind of evidence to assume that, because otherwise you have like a 50-50 shot of it being made up and it being just this apocryphal teacher. Like if you don't have anything to sway that meter to one side or another, then you know it's no better than just flipping a quarter. Like you just don't know which one's more probable. But I think that the fact that, you know, we have this early idea of what the Messiah figure was, and that they were expecting a Messiah figure to come and, like, you know, provide salvation to the Jewish people. I think that sways like the probability in the favor of Jesus being a mythical character.
So can you go over a little bit, like break it down for me? Really, who were Josephus and Tacitus? Because I hear those ones thrown out a lot, but I don't really know who they are, why they would be considered any kind of authority on this matter. And then you said that there were two issues with Josephus.
Right.
Yeah, if I can say it.
Yeah,
Josephus.
Josephus. Yeah, that's right, Josephus. So Josephus is the one that Christians are mostly pull out because it has a nice commercial for Jesus right in the middle of some passages. And Josephus was a Jewish Roman historian who was writing his Antiquities of the Jews, and he was recording like basically, just the general history of the Jews. And so in it he talks about different things, and right in like the right place, I guess, is what Eusebius thought, because in my opinion, as well as some other scholars out there, it's a complete fabricated like section that was inserted, because in the previous paragraph it talks about how Pilate sent his men clothed as these Jewish protesters, sent them out into the crowd, and ordered them to just kill anybody that they could, right? So it talks about that, and then commercial for Jesus. And then after that, it's like, and now about this time, there was another sad calamity or something like that. So you have this like billboard sign for Jesus right before that. That's like, he did 10,000 wonderful things. And it's just like, it's a very much a glowing review of it. And then in the next part, it talks about another sad calamity. Well, I mean, that seems to reference the paragraph before it. If you remove that paragraph from Josephus, then they seem to flow perfectly. Whereas inserted in there, it's kind of like a road bump that gets off track. A lot of people like to say that Josephus already has patchwork worked in, like he talks about different things and whatnot. But you see, the thing is that he never inserts a paragraph, and then the paragraph after that, he references the paragraph prior to the paragraph he just wrote. Like, it's very disjointed thinking. But I think that Eusebius, which the reason why Eusebius is important is that Origen had copies of Josephus' Antiquities of the Jews, right? Origen regularly argued for Jesus, his historicity, and what Jesus taught, right? If that paragraph existed in Origen's book, then he would have used it in his debates as a glowing example of Jesus existing. But see, the problem is Origen never uses it at all. It's not until Eusebius of Caesarea, who inherited his copy of Antiquities, because books around it, it's not like you could go down to the corner. I don't know what they had back then. Walmart? Probably Walmart. It's not like they could go down to Walmart and get a copy of Josephus. So, I mean, Eusebius had Origen's copy of Josephus, and then he starts using this paragraph. Nobody before Eusebius starts using this paragraph. And Eusebius is known to forge things all over the place. He was very disingenuous with his record keeping. And so that's the main thing that makes me doubt the passage. Now, there's a lot of people that say that, a more secular or more Jewish kind of version of the paragraph exists, but any reference that you can find to that stems from the Eusebius version of the Antiquities of the Jews. So you literally can't find any source that supports the idea that what Josephus actually wrote was something that was more Jewish. There's that. And then there's this other part in it where it says James, the brother of Christ, or something like that. The problem is that the sentence structurally sounds more like an interpolation. Like the brother of Christ or whatnot seems more like something that you would write in the margins, rather than if you were actually wanting to identify that person as the brother of Christ. So, I mean, this is coming from people that study the language and everything. It's not just me pulling it out of my ass or anything like that. And so those are the two things right there. But also, there's a really good case to be made that the Jesus that's referenced there is Jesus. It's a completely different Jesus. But then Tacitus. So to get to Tacitus, that was Josephus.
Okay.
Tacitus is another historian that was writing in the 2nd century. And he regularly corresponded with Pliny the Younger. Pliny the Younger, he was interrogating Christians at the time. Like, he didn't know anything about the Christians' faith, so he found out through interrogating them. He found out what their beliefs were. Tacitus was then writing about the burning of Rome, right? And he attributes, like, he says that Nero blamed the Christians for burning Rome, and then throws in, like, I believe Pontius Pilate's name, talking about, their beliefs. And so, even if you like, he uses Crestus and Christians, I believe. I think he says Christians and then Christos is what he says. And so, even if that particular part in Tacitus was actually talking about, like, Christians, and even Jesus, it doesn't actually cement Jesus as existing in history, because that would mean that Jesus didn't die in the 30s and he died some other time. But also, the burning of Rome happened about 60 something AD, and Tacitus was writing in the 2nd century. So, for one thing, Christians were already in existence in the 2nd century. Tacitus had regular conversations with Pliny the Younger. Pliny the Younger, he only found out about Christians through interrogating them. And if the Christians were actually, blamed for Rome, the fire of Rome, like if Nero actually blamed them, then Pliny's uncle, Pliny the Elder, would have actually, he would have told him about it. Like, he had a direct source to know what happened then, because Pliny the Elder was in Rome when it was burning. So there's a lot of reasons why to doubt that passage is really indicative of history. But also, even if the passage is true at face value, it doesn't actually say that Jesus existed in history. All it says is that Christians existed in Rome in 64 AD. So those are the two ones.
Awesome. So a few questions and clarifications, if you can, is the burning of Rome was when exactly then?
It was around the 60s. 60s AD. I think technically 64 AD, I think, is when it occurred.
All right. Okay. And then I'm not sure if you caught the episode of Non Sequitur Show when the coin guy was on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because he was talking about when like, you can tell even by the coins that Rome and the Jews weren't on good terms. So you have like that more or less backing it up. But even when the Jews made their own money, they didn't have like Jesus on it.
Mm-hmm.
But it reminded me of that when you were talking about Josephus, more or less watching them and like looking at false messiahs and stuff. So would that more or less be why they were so, like, that the Romans were so interested in their religion, is because they were like watching them? Or,
well, I mean, you have to understand, like, Christianity by the mid to end of the 1st century was starting to gain a lot of traction. It was starting to spread. And so I think that Rome and the Romans in general were paying attention to them because they were growing so fast and so rapid. It was a group that was really gaining a lot of traction. And I mean, I would think that would gain notice to, any governing body. I mean, back then, religions were like, control vehicles, if you will. They were used to control a group of people. So, also, I mean, religions also map pretty well to like actual people groups. So, because, like, Jews, we now consider them to be both a race and a religion, because, back when, you the Jews first formed, they were just all one race of people, and it was all just, you know, kind of one group. And eventually they would splinter out in these different sects and everything like that. But that's why we consider them a race now, is because it was a religion, but the religion identified the people group in its entirety.
Okay, right. Well, that makes sense. So Josephus was first, and then Tacitus, you said around 200 AD, and you said those are like the two most reputable, um, out of a sea of not reputable. Like,
well, I mean, I would say that those are probably some of the most popular ones.
okay,
and it wasn't 200 AD. It was like second century would be the 100s.
Oh yeah,
which that always screws me up too.
yeah.
I always have to think, okay, well, what are the leading numbers, and then you add one to it.
Yeah. And 20th Century Fox helps.
Yeah. But those are some of the more popular ones, but there are some others that are mentioned. Like there's Mar Bar Serapion that is often mentioned. He doesn't actually prove that Jesus existed either, because he's just regurgitating, you know, common Christian beliefs at the time. I mean, there's I have like a whole list of these extra biblical sources that people generally use. But I mean, what every single source comes down to is the fact that they're either relaying like commonly held Christian beliefs of the time, or they're talking about just Christians in general existing. And they're not actually providing any kind of firsthand account or any kind of sense of like an actual physical Jesus. It's always either about the Christians or what the Christians believe.
All right. Right. And like when that's what they're reporting, it's not like you said, it's not really reputable. They're not really giving any kind of evidence. It's just like, it's again, circular reasoning, just like the Bible is itself.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, if you ask for another source other than the Bible and you just get a source that's citing the Bible.
Well, yeah. And like one of the biggest things for historical sources is being independent. So if you have a source that, you know, is talking about commonly held Christian beliefs, and it's in like the 2nd century, then you can't really say it's independent, because the Christian community, the Christian religion was well established by the 2nd century. I mean, honestly, by the 70s in the 1st century, you had Christianity that was pretty well established. So anything like that existed after the Gospels were written, or even Paul was writing, you have to be a bit skeptical about it.
Yeah, you do. And that's like how you get here. Like, you're skeptical about something and you look into it and find things don't follow. And I think that's like why most of us are here. But I really appreciate the research that you've put into this, and I can imagine like you're decently passionate about it, like from the amount of knowledge that you have on it.
I mean, I definitely am. And I think that it's not because like I could see how that might seem to somebody as it being very important to like my core person or whatnot. But it's just that like I always want to be correct about something. I hate it when I don't have the correct information, or I espouse information that isn't correct. And so I want to be correct. Like, I want to have good information. I want to be able to give people the best information that's available. And so when I hear things like for instance, one of the arguments for historicity is that if you have some portion of the Bible that's written in Aramaic And you can tell by like looking at the original sources and whatnot. If it's written in Aramaic, then Jesus actually spoke that. Well, to say that, then you would have to be saying that Jesus is the only person that spoke Aramaic. But then, I mean, how did that get written down in the first place, right? But you would have to be saying that Jesus was the only person speaking Aramaic and that you can't make shit up in Aramaic. And so that's why that doesn't make sense. I mean, obviously other people were speaking Aramaic. Obviously people could still make shit up when in Aramaic. It's not like Aramaic was, bullshit proof. So like that particular criteria, I think, is one of the weakest ones for the historical argument. And I saw somebody, I think it was Fenrir in the chat. He asked, like, what is the best evidence that historicists have for Jesus? And I would say, like, I don't know, I consider all of the evidence for Jesus's historicity to be bad. But I think probably the best one that they have is the fact that Jesus's name or whatnot is very generic. It was actually Yeshua, which is a prophetic name in general, but it was a popular name, and messiahs, were like these failed messiahs were a thing. Huh? Oh, it was not Joe that asked that? Oh, okay. Sorry.
It's just not you. It don't matter.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Upside down.
Sorry about that. I was trying to remember because I saw the chat and anyways. But yeah, I mean, I would say that's probably the one that has the best, like it that's the one that isn't the most shittiest. like on the shitty scale, that would be at the bottom.
on these lines, Snarky wants to know what other references people could go to get the information. She wants to look into mythicism more.
Okay. Well, now I would say that the best resources for it would be to actually look up, like, as far as, okay, so for extra biblical resources, I would say just look at what these people are actually saying. Because, I mean, you can find people that are, that use extra biblical sources for it. I mean, Rational Wiki has a really good write-up on it. I believe, what is it? Oh, I can't remember what the site's called. It's like, I don't think it's the Iron Chariots website.
My determination is both Natja and Fenrir asked the same question.
Oh, Natja and Fenrir asked the same question. So I would go directly to the sources, because like you can find like what Tacitus actually wrote. You can find what Josephus actually wrote. And I mean, you can read for yourself and kind of make a determination there. Like the Josephus one's a little bit more complicated, but like Richard Carrier's On the Historicity of Jesus has a lot of great information in it. Of course, it's like it's a really big book, and it's really meant as like a full like deep dive into it. It's a lot. And I mean, you could even go to richardcarrier.info and you can look at his blog articles, and he's got a lot of great blogs in there that explain all of his positions. Like, for instance, a lot of people shit on Bayesian analysis, and that's how Richard Carrier is promoting that you can prove things in history. And actually, he's got a blog article up right now where somebody reviewed using Bayes' theorem on older like historical debates that were being had. And when what the person found, just long story short, was that the historians that were talking about like how the Jewish people came into existence, how that particular idea changed over time matches perfectly with Bayesian analysis. Because as the idea changed over time, the one that had the best Bayesian analysis was the one that won out. So Bayesian like historians have been using Bayesian analysis, whether they realize it or not, for a long time. And there have been multiple historians in the past that have brought up Bayesian analysis in regards to historicity, which Bayesian analysis is a little bit complicated of a mathematical principle, but basically you take your prior probability for something happening and you would multiply it by the probability of it not happening, and then you divide it by, like, I can't explain like the mathematical principles verbally very well, but the way that I employ it is that you take the prior probability of something happening and you factor that into whether or not you should assign a high probability to whether or not something actually happened. Like, for instance, Jesus raising from the dead. It has a very low probability that it happened because of the fact that nobody prior to him have been known to raise from the dead. So you're more reasonable in assuming that Jesus didn't raise from the dead than if he did, because we have no evidence to suggest that he did. There's no evidence in the past that would suggest that people have that ability. And there's legit, I keep circling back down to the lack of evidence, but there's no evidence after that fact to suggest that people could do it. So, I mean, it seems way more probable that he didn't actually raise from the dead. And I mean, that's kind of how I employ it. That's I guess a really, really fuzzy like idea of how it's actually used, but there's that. The David Fitzgerald's books are awesome. I would suggest getting those. David Fitzgerald has Nailed, and he's got Jesus Mything in Action, which is a 3-volume book. They're actually pretty cheap. I think the Mything in Action books are $6 a piece, and I'm not sure about the Nailed book, but I know that that's pretty cheap too. He gives a really great overview of like the mythicist position in general. And I would suggest looking into his books. I was trying to think of like resources online that you could go to, and really just like online resources would be Richard Carrier's blog, and then like Rational Wiki has some great articles on it, but you do have to be a little wary of it because it is kind of a wiki type of thing. But if you really want to get the good information, you've got to go to like Richard Carrier's books or Randall Helm's Gospel Fictions, and then you've also got Robert Price's books. His books are really great for that. Earl Doherty, he's got some pretty good books too.
Awesome. And I just want to make note that Nailed and Mything in Action are great titles. That was gold.
Yeah, they are. We've actually got all of their books here. I'm still working my way through David Fitzgerald's books, but Oh yeah, I actually, for David Fitzgerald's Mything in Action series, I actually designed the cover layouts for that.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah,
that's really, really cool.
Cool. Can I ask a question?
Oh, definitely.
I suppose, Don.
Okay. Now, I don't know a whole lot about it, but it appears to me that there's more evidence towards Jesus not existing than there is of him existing. And there doesn't seem to be any like real evidence of him existing. My question is, when it comes to a God, we need really good evidence to start believing. Why do you think there's so many people that don't need hardly any evidence to believe that Jesus existed?
That's a really good question, and I really don't. I don't know why they shirk on that. I guess maybe because like the God in the Bible is completely supernatural, while there's at least a little bit of naturalness to the Jesus figure. Because, you know, he was like, they picture him as a human that was walking the earth. And that's the Jesus that everybody knows. So I guess because um like it doesn't seem far-fetched for a human to exist, but it is far-fetched for a God to exist. But when you really think about it, up until like Jesus, all of these figures in the Bible, everything in the Bible, with the exception of a few people, none of those people actually existed. Like Abraham, Noah, Moses, all of those guys, they didn't exist, and we have archaeological evidence to show that they didn't exist. And then even prior to that, in other theologies where you had magical beings, none of those actually existed. There was actually a guy called Euhemerus, which is where we get Euhemerize, which is where you take a mythical figure and you make him into a more real person. Like, the kind of movies where they take like Hercules and well, I guess the literal Kevin Sorbo show Hercules would be a euhemerization of the mythical character of Hercules, because it's saying, oh, these people actually existed in history, and here are stories about them. And so you have this guy Euhemerus that's done that in the past, but also like the Odyssey, the Odyssey never actually happened. So I mean, you have all of these things in the past that have proven not to not happen, even though they have these human figures in it. But because Jesus is the central portion of this particular faith, and I guess they feel that it's more likely a human existed than like a supernatural being existed, they kind of go like what I call the lazy route of just assuming that he existed. But you can't just assume that he existed, because we don't just assume that anybody existed in history. I mean, even like Homer is doubted to actually have existed in history. That's actually a debate that's going on right now in historical circles, is whether or not Homer was an actual person. And we don't have good evidence to say that he was a historical person.
Right. And to that point, I was actually going to ask next, so I'm glad you brought it up, is Zero said in the live chat that he still kind of thinks that Jesus mythicism is kind of just a silly idea. But and his point was just like, why would they make up a person? But it's like exactly that. If you make a myth just look more real, the whole thing looks more real. And the Bible has a history of doing that, like with Noah and with Adam and Eve, and other religions as well. I think it's a little bit disingenuous to think that that the Greeks didn't believe in Zeus and Hercules and Hades and all of them just because we didn't grow up thinking that they were real. They probably did. But now we're pretty unanimously in agreement that they didn't exist, that they weren't real. Those were made up. And it really, really could just be a matter of time before we think the same thing about Jesus Christ and Noah. But yeah, go on.
Well, I was just gonna say you're exactly right, and there's also this myth of Inanna. She was actually in the same region as Jesus was supposed to be. She was even she went through a passion. She went to the underworld and she got stripped of all of her clothes and whatnot, and she sacrificed herself to save another person. And then she was her corpse was nailed up on a wall, which is, for all intents and purposes, a crucifixion. And then she died down there, and then 3 days later she rose again. And I would suggest anybody that wants to look into it, go and search for the resurrection of Inanna or the death of Inanna or whatnot. You can plug that into Google, and you can read it. And it's a little bit of a long read, but and I have a really good video on Inanna and its connection to the Bible, because the Bible actually references Inanna, and so it shows that in that area, there were dying and rising gods. That was a common motif, and the Jewish people were already exposed to the idea of somebody sacrificing their life to save the lives of other people. Not to mention the fact that the Jews were expecting a Messiah figure, and they even thought the Messiah was already pre-existent and that he was coming back to save them. And so it's really not that much of a mental jump or anything like that to say that, the Jewish people would have made up this Messiah figure, because I think that the only way that a Messiah figure would actually be successful is if you made him up and he was actually mythical.
Right. And I'm not just saying, and I'm not like, and I wanted to make clear, I'm not picking on Zero at all. I just saw it in the chat, that maybe he did exist. We don't know 100%, obviously, but we can use the scientific method. We can use reasoning to discern whether or not he really existed, and you can't just presuppose something. And,
right. And a lot of people will fall into that trap of just assuming that he did exist, because I guess, like I said before, it's easier to assume that a human existed than, anything else.
Right. And it's common knowledge too, but common knowledge isn't always correct.
Right. Exactly.
Right. I don't know how much time you have left. I don't want to keep you too long. I need to get ready for work in like 50 minutes, so I have some time left. But I do have some questions for you, and I want to make sure if the live chat has any more questions that they get those to Don real quick. First, can you get the link to your Inanna video, and I can link that below?
Oh, definitely.
Awesome.
You can continue asking me questions while I get it up.
Okay, sounds good. And then I wanted to point out, and I think you just did, the Joshua and Yeshua.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I thought that was really interesting, and because when I was more religious, I learned that God's name is like Yahweh or Jehovah or whatever, and it's not Jehovah. Like there was no J in the or like hard J in the Hebrew language. And then when I thought about that later, like putting that like with Yeshua, I'm like, well, now how would you say that with the J? Like shush. And then I'm like, hold on, I'm gonna throw that away because that messes with my reasoning for a little while. And then like when someone said that, I'm like, God damn it, I knew it. Just like, but it's I think it's funny how people ignore certain evidences that like fuck up their worldview more or less. And like I know I felt it multiple times, especially with religion, but that's why it's like difficult to even still now talk to religious people. Like even in like my personal life, I don't have a lot of religious discussions with people because it's difficult to break through that wall. And John Cedars recently posted a video, everything you need to know about a Jehovah's Witness in 5 minutes. And he gave a lot of good information. But at the end of it, it was don't like approach a Jehovah's Witness and think you're going to change their mind, because like it's probably just not going to happen, or it's not going to happen as easily as you think it will. Like there are walls there, and it's like that with most religions. And the more indoctrinated that they are, the harder it is to reach them. And sometimes it's just like it's thin glass. You just tap it and the whole thing shatters. But other times it's just like bulletproof glass. It's just like you can shoot a hole in it, but it's still holding up. But yeah. Anyways, other questions. I got one more relevant one, and then I got some fun ones for you.
Okay.
And we'll see, and we'll see what the live chat has. Seeing how your religion didn't super duper impact you when you were younger, what made you really want to dedicate so much time to it? What you started this YouTube video, did you say back in 2013 or before that?
Yeah, I believe 2013 was when I started the channel. But I didn't actually start putting out like videos until I want to say a few months or so after that. And even then it wasn't like a regular thing. But yeah, so I got really passionate about it because of, it's kind of like I came into this new worldview. I had, this, I guess, just a profound like moment, I guess you could say, of when I was like, oh, I'm an atheist. And I felt okay. Like I that was the hardest thing for me, was being okay with being an atheist. And as soon as I was okay with that, things got so much easier. I felt so much better about it. And I don't know. I found myself online and I was investigating this new belief that I had, because I wanted to be like, I knew that I didn't believe in a God, but I didn't know like good answers for people. Like I didn't know like how to respond to different things. And so it was really just curiosity and boredom that had me going through the rabbit hole of all of the atheist literature and videos and all that kind of stuff. And so I just sort of started doing it, and it just kind of snowballed from there.
And it's fun. Like the deeper you dive into it, it's fun, and the impact that it has on people who watch these videos, your videos. They're it's fun, and it's kind of fulfilling, you know. But do we have any questions from the chat before I move on, Don? You might be muted. I saw you unmute yourself. All right. Well,
I think I saw a couple.
Okay.
Jen with one N asked if I've read Lamb by Christopher Moore. She says it's a funny book about Christ's life and his best friend Biff. I have to say that sounds like an interesting book. I haven't read it, but I'm definitely wanting to look that up. The Compelled Unbeliever asked, who is GE's favorite Bible scholarship author? And I mean, I would have to say that my favorite one is Richard Carrier, obviously, but I don't want people to think that I just regurgitate what Carrier says, because while I use Carrier's books as good references for my own arguments, I listen to the bare facts, and of course Carrier has his opinions in it and whatnot, but I tried to isolate the bare facts of it and see what makes the most sense for me, and I come to the same conclusions that Carrier does. And that's not to say that if I disagreed with Carrier, that means that I'm right and he's wrong. I think that he's definitely an expert in the field and he should be listened to. But like, I don't know, when I hear his arguments against like Josephus or his arguments against Tacitus, I mean, he has answers that make logical sense and are reasonable to believe. And the stuff that I get from historicists are riddled with assumptions. They're riddled with lackadaisical thinking, and I'm not compelled by that. Like I mean, they're just, I just don't see any logic in the way that they argue things. Like that whole Aramaic argument. Like I just don't see the logic in saying that, oh, Aramaic in the Bible means that Jesus said it. Like that's just I just don't see how that actually makes sense.
Right. And I mean, we could ask Ken Ham, were you there?
True.
Don, you're back. I see him, but I don't hear him still. Sorry, Don. You said you saw more questions, John?
Oh, I saw those two, and I don't think I saw any more.
All right. Well, got a couple fun ones for you.
Okay. Yeah, let's do it.
Cool. Do you have a favorite superhero?
Favorite superhero? See, that's always the hardest question.
I know, isn't it? I hate it. Or okay, what's your top five? Top five superheroes.
Okay. So top five. I mean, I've got to put Batman in the very first one.
Okay.
And if I had to pick an absolute favorite one, I'd have to go with Batman because I grew up with Batman just all over the place. But then I'd have to go with Spider-Man for my second one, Wolverine for my third one, and then probably Superman for my fourth one, and then
Batman.
Well, Batman was number one.
And number 2, 3, 4, and 5.
I was gonna say if it didn't come back on, I'm like, now I also grew up with Batman, but we both know you're just saying that because John's in the chat.
Okay, I got my mic up and running again.
Awesome. Well, we need to hear your number 5 yet, though, right?
Oh yeah, I was trying to think of what would definitely be in my number 5 spot, and I don't know. I guess number 5 would just be like X-Men in general, like that entire group. Like no single one out of that, but just the entire group, X-Men in general, I guess.
Yeah, it's kind of hard. Like whenever I try to answer like my top 5 in superheroes, like I've always left someone out. I'd rather like just be like, all right, who's your top 5 DC, top 5 Marvel? Now in Marvel, top 5 X-Men, because it's not easy. There's so many good characters to choose from. But Don, did you have?
Yeah. Stay Tuned was wondering about if he missed your singing or not, but you haven't sang yet. What's wrong with you, GE?
Shit, I don't know if I should sing. I might like kill all of your listeners.
How about
they knew
you
what
sing?
They were getting into.
Yeah. How about you sing the answers to Notch's questions?
Okay.
How much do you earn from the Illuminati?
Okay, so nothing. Nothing.
Earbud warning.
Now, how about the Skeptic Mafia, though? You've got to be making something off of them.
How about how many forms did you have to sign with the Illuminati so that you stayed quiet?
Oh, I think it was like 13 forms.
You're not singing it. You got to sing it.
Oh, I gotta sing it. That's right. Sorry. About 13 forms in triplicate.
Okay. And
sing like
and What happens if you tell the truth?
Satan's dick up my ass.
You know, I've heard he knows how to use it, though.
Yeah, he does.
So Lee had a couple questions. One is for you, Mac.
The White Tiger Zord?
Yeah.
I saw that,
White-
yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Good eye.
And the other is GE. Have you read Lamb by Christopher Moore?
Oh yeah, I haven't, but yeah, I mentioned that earlier when you were trying to get your sound to working and stuff. So,
Oh,
but no, I haven't. But I think I'm going to check it out now that Jen has given me her glowing review of it.
And I'm going to
Okay.
have to check out that Batman and Jesus thing coming out because that sounds fucking fantastic.
yeah. I put the link in chat for the IMDb. I'll put it in the side chat here for you guys too.
Oh, cool. Hot dog.
Compelled Unbeliever wants to know your favorite biblical scholar.
Oh yeah, Richard Carrier.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bible origin or textual criticism, which is better to learn?
Okay, so did you say Bible criticism or textual? What was it again?
Biblical origins
Mhm.
or textual criticism. Like,
Right.
do you learn the Bible so you can criticize what's written in it, or do you learn about where the Bible's from and go after that as an argument? Which is better?
Well, I mean, honestly, both ways are a pretty good way to go about, like learning about the Bible. I think that you need both in order to really understand like things in the Bible. Like, okay, so for instance, you have to kind of know the origins of the Bible to know that Paul was the one that wrote Galatians. And in Galatians 1:19, there's the passage that says, like, he met nobody there except for James, the brother of the Lord. So a lot of apologists like to point to that particular verse as saying, well, Jesus had a brother, therefore Jesus existed. That might be solid if you didn't do the textual criticism of it and go back to the Greek, where the actual word for brother is a vague word that both means a person of the same religious group and a blood brother. So in the actual context of that, it's actually too vague to make a statement on whether it was part of a religious group or a blood brother. He would have to the person writing it, Paul, would have to make some kind of distinction as to what kind of brother. So I would say in some cases, to really know like what is going on in a particular passage, you have to have both. So I think that it just depends on what you're more interested in. Like biblical origins is quite a lot more interesting than learning how the Grecian words that are translated into whatever edition you have affect the actual original meaning of it. So I guess one is more technical while the other is more based in I guess just the historical setting or the historical information.
Okay. And the last one I got here is from Compelled Unbeliever again. How important is the Gnostic teachings as far as the understanding of the modern Bible?
Well, I think that those are very important because you have to understand exactly how varying the early Christian church was, because the Gnostic Gospels and everything like that paint a picture of several different ideas that the Jewish Christians were having at the time. And so I think that it's very important in the context of understanding the fact that the Bible that you have today is a very small subset of what actually was going on in the first century.
Okay,
I'd say that's
cool.
pretty fair. Do you have any more for him, Don?
That's it from me.
Pokey pokey.
Yeah, and Mac, if you want, I can
Yeah.
get you Matt Powell's email if you want to email him to set up something. He's pretty open to talking to people.
Awesome. Yeah. I'd like that a lot. I just saw that I missed him in the live chat. I was like, oh shoot. I've been thinking about trying to reach out to him. So yeah, that'd be really cool. Sorry, he's not here to listen to that. But yeah, I got 2 more quick questions for you, and then I'm ready to wrap up if you are.
All right.
Okay. One, what kind of music do you like to listen to? Are there any specific artists you're listening to right now?
Well, see, I haven't really been listening to a lot of music lately, but the last album I bought was Post Malone's newest album. And I really like that. That has like a really laid back kind of feel to it. So yeah.
And whose did you say?
Huh?
And whose album did you say it was?
Oh, Post Malone.
Post Malone. Okay, I don't think I've heard of it.
Yeah, he's got one other album that's out, and I mean it's pretty good too. It's very much a laid back kind of rock mixed with rap almost.
Awesome. I'll write that down. Check it out.
I also like Tupac.
Oh yeah. Awesome. I have a quite different tastes usually. I've always been a big fan of the Goo Goo Dolls.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and I like Ed Sheeran a lot now.
Okay.
Like him. But and then my last fun question for you is if you had to write a book on one of the things on your channel, so just religion in general, Jesus myth, or flat earth, what would you pick?
Oh man. I really don't know. I think that I would probably write something on like probably anti-science in general. Like that would include flat earth and anti-evolution and all that kind of stuff. And it would probably have to deal with the Bible a little bit. But I think that if I had to write a book, it would probably be on that or mythicism. But like, I mean, I'm a big supporter of the minimal mythicist theory and everything like that, and I really don't see the point in me writing a book about it. That's probably why I would go with the anti-science book rather than the mythicist book, because like David Fitzgerald and Richard Carrier and all them, that I mean they've already put out a lot of great work to it, and I don't really have a good idea of what I could provide that would add to the conversation in that way. That's why I choose to do videos like I do, just talking about information that already exists.
And then one last question from the Godless Iowan that he hasn't asked yet is, are you ready to convert to the true Pentecostal faith?
Yes, that one particular version of Christianity is definitely the real one.
Yeah, it's really the way to go if you don't want to go straight to hell. So, cool. Well, thank you so much for making time to come over to my little channel. I really, really appreciate it. I'm a big fan of your videos, your work, your research, your Bible studies on Tuesdays, which I need to catch back up on, but I really love them. And
well, I appreciate you watching and everything like that. I have to say, back when I saw your video where you were wearing the beanie, I mean, I thought that was pretty awesome. Like that was like, oh shit, people are actually wearing this stuff.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah, I have it right over here, and I keep your pen on me too.
Oh, that's awesome.
And actually, I wear this all the time now.
Oh yeah? Yeah. I wear mine all the time too.
It's awesome. Yeah.
We're gonna have to get Don one so he doesn't feel left out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Friendship bracelets.
You guys want to be my friend? Thank you.
Oh shit! I let that slip. Damn it.
Lee,
We love
Lee
you
in the
guys.
comment said, but not so much the singing. Hey,
would
I
love-
sound
if I
like
can
a
get you on a
goddamn
record.
angel.
You do. You do. One goddamned angel.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, do you guys want to plug? Do you guys have anything coming up that you want to mention, or do you guys want to tell people where to find you on Facebook and on Twitter and on YouTube?
Yeah, Don, you can go ahead and go.
Yeah, go for it, Don.
I'm another freaking atheist. I have a channel where I interview other atheists, and I do some social information and videos as well. I'm 8 away from 200 subs, and tomorrow will be 2 months on YouTube, so I am extremely happy with the way things are going.
That's awesome.
So thank you everybody for that. Really appreciate it. And also Max Awesome, like and subscribe to him.
Thank you, guys. Go ahead, John.
Yeah. So I have a lot of things kind of in the works. And like I've got an interview with Richard Carrier that I've got to get edited up. I also have a recorded a recorded interview with Matt Powell that I'm going to get up on my channel. And then tomorrow I'm recording an interview with a flat earther that I'm going to need to get up. So yeah, I've got a lot of things in the works. I got a lot of things planned out. Luckily my channel is not hit with a community strike anymore. That was resolved a few weeks ago, so I can still stream on Fridays, which I'm planning on doing for the foreseeable future. And you can find me, Godless Engineer, on the internets, just anywhere. Godless Engineer.
Awesome. Well, there you go, guys. I want to thank the chat. Again, thanks, Don, for helping keep up with the chat. Thank you, the Godless Iowan, Mrs. Snarky, Caitlin Chloe, Jennifer Lynn, uncompelled, compelled unbeliever. My bad. Wonder Lady, Lee, Matthew Powell for jumping in. Thanks, Naja Witness. I did not forget you way down under. But thank you everyone for joining in. Thanks for watching. Thanks for sharing. I really appreciate all the support. You can find me on Twitter, and you can also now find me on Facebook, just under Gray Skeptic. I already added you guys.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, so thank you. And also keep a lookout for my League of Extraordinary Atheists for Humanism Facebook page. I'm trying to add more things where we can help out our community a little more, and the humanistic aspect of what we all like to do here. So just keep an eye on that group on Facebook and share that link if you will. I'd appreciate it.
Okay. Yeah, and everybody here, if you're not already subscribed to Max, subscribe to him now.
Please. All right, thanks guys. I won't be here next Friday. I'm taking a week off to do some stuff with family, but I'm still going to try to upload a video by then. So that's all we have for you tonight. If you guys have any last words,
I'm pretty good.
All right, cool.
Be freaky.
Be freaky.
Don't forget to stand up and use your voice.
There you go.
That's my line.
And I don't have a tagline yet.
Nacha wants an after party.
I actually have to get ready for work. I have to leave in about 25 minutes. But if someone sets up an after party, I might jump in for a couple minutes, or just put it on a speaker, and I can talk to you guys on the way.
Okay, I'll set one up and send the links out.
Cool. That sounds good. Thanks, Don.
Awesome.
All right. thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again next time, guys. Have a good night.
See y'all later.
Later.